That just shows how the stock market is so every one little thing can.
All right, let's get started. Today we're going to learn a relatively famous Gemara, which is typically studied around this time of year. It's a long Gemara, but hopefully for some of you who may not be familiar with the details of the story, you'll gain insight into the details of the story. And for those of you who study this, we'll throw in some of the mefarshim, some of the commentary, which elaborate on the story. Unlike the Gemara we've been learning the last few weeks, which we've gone into the world of Agadata and the mythical and perhaps the exaggerated metaphors that we spoke about. This is reality. We're getting into the more tragic stories in Jewish history. Up until the Holocaust, 75, 80 years ago, until that point, the greatest single tragedy in Jewish history was the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, specifically the second temple. So we know both temples were destroyed on the same day, the 9th of Av, but the second temple, destroyed by the Romans, included much more death for the Jewish people. Obviously, it's an exile that we still are in. And the Gemara over here records some of the stories of the tragedies that took place, beginning with the events that led to the destruction of the temple. So that's what we're going to read about over here in our Gemara today. If you're following along in the Talmud, it's Tractate GItten, page 55b on the bottom of the page. 55b of Tractate GItten.
Is it in this packet here?
Yeah, it's right there. I'm starting from
The top.
I think the top of the page.
Okay.
The Gemara says like this. Over here, the Gemara begins with a statement saying, Kamzta and Bar Kamtza Charav Yerushalayim. Jerusalem was destroyed because of an episode with Kamzta and Bar Kamtza. Atarnegolas v'tarnegolta charuv tur malka. Because of a tarnegolas, which is a rooster, the tarnegolta and a hen, the Har Hamelach was destroyed. Another major area was destroyed. And Ashaka de Rispak Charuv Beitar, and because of an episode of the side of a carriage, Beitar was destroyed. So three major tragedies all resulted seemingly. We'll discuss that in a minute. What that even means. Does that mean that this wouldn't have happened if not for these details? But either way, three major tragedies all took place because of minor events. You know, today we're very aware of this possibility, right? It's one of the many lessons we've learned over the past year and a half is how a very minor event can change the entire world, right?
Because of weddings. They're all related to weddings.
They're all related, these are all connected to weddings, right?
Yeah. I don't want to say.
All right, no. That's a great. What's the lesson exactly over there? What are we suggesting?
That's you say.
So, three events leading to, and I remember hearing about the history of World War I. Now, most people see World War II as a pretty direct result of World War I. It was almost the conclusion, step two of what was started in World War I. World War I began by the actions of one person. It was one person. In the Austrian-Hungarian, there was an Austrian-Hungarian issue, and there was a person sitting at a bar, and he saw the royal prince moving by, and he took a gun and he killed that person. That event is what led to resulted in the many actions which led to the full-out outbreak of World War I, which eventually led to the outbreak of World War II, in which together over 100 million people were killed because of the actions of one person. Now, it's important to explained that obviously it wasn't randomly that a single person did something and that resulted, and that was the only cause. But it's like a tinderbox. You know, everything was very fragile, and sometimes all it takes in a very fragile situation is that one act to ignite everything. And I think that's perhaps the best way to understand this too, is that it was a fragile situation, a dangerous situation, but what ignited the destruction were small events, which we're going to spell out, at least we'll spell out one of them. Small events sometimes, but never underestimate the power of a small event, of a small action. And it just as it exists in negative, it exists in positive too. So what is it that happened that the Talmud is describing? So let's go to the first and most famous of these three episodes. Kamzta and Bar Kamtza Charov Yerushalayim. Because of Kamzta and Bar Kamtza, two people, one was named Kamzta, one was named Bar Kamtza. Jerusalem was destroyed because of an episode with Kamzta and Bar Kamtza. What is the story? Now, who Gavra? There was a certain person. Doesn't mean identify who it was. Ahu Gavra. There was a person. The Rachme Kamtza, who loved Kamzta. He was a friend of a man named Kamzta. Ubaldevavi de Bar Kamtza. And he disliked Bar Kamtza. Doesn't mean dislike. Baldevavi means he was an enemy of Bar Kamtza. So he loved this guy named Kamzta, was an enemy of Bar Kamtza. And Avad Suudasa. He made a party. This man, we don't know his name. He made a party. Omar Leila Shame, and he tells his attendants, Zil Aisili Kamtza, go invite my friend Kamtza to the party. Oza, he went, and this attendant made the mistake, and Aisile Bar Kamtza. Instead of going and inviting Kamtza, who he loved, he invited Bar Kamtza, who he disliked. Also, Bar Kamtza was invited to the party. He came to the party. So now the host of the party sees that this Kamtza, this Bar Kamtza sitting there. Omar Lei said to him, Nichti, 1 second, take a look. Hahu Gavra. This person, you, in other words, you're sitting here at my party. Baldebava Dahu Gavra. You're my enemy. What are you doing here? My boy, what are you doing here? Kumpuk. Get up and get out of here. And as you can imagine, there is nothing more embarrassing than being publicly told to leave an event. It is, you can imagine, it is literally from the most embarrassing situations one can be. And the Talmud the Talmud speaks very harshly about one who publicly humiliates someone. You should really avoid that scenario. One should always avoid even the smallest possibility of humiliating someone in public. Anyway, he said, get out of the party. Omar Le, to which this Bar Kamtza said, Hoil Vasoi, I'm here already. Now that I'm here, Shavkam, why don't you just let me stay? V'yahivna lach demei made achilna v'shasina. And I will pay you the amount, whatever I eat and drink, I'll pay for it. Don't embarrass me. You won't lose anything if I stay here because I'll pay for my meal. Omar Le, to which the host said, Loy, no, you have to leave. Omar Le, Yehil Munalach, Palgo de Sidasi. I will pay, just tells you again, the fear of shame. He said, I will pay for half of the party as long as you leave me alone. Omar Le Loy. You see the power of emotion here. The power of shame, which caused this person to say, I'll pay for half of this party. Obviously, he had no intention to pay for that party. And the power of hate, that even though he was offered half of the party, even though he was offered half, he said, get out of here. I cannot celebrate while you're here. I will pay for the entire meal if you just let me stay. He said no. And at this point, he lifted him with his hands, lifted him up, and threw him out of their den. And that obviously caused this person to be extremely upset. Now, I was looking at the Mefarshim on this topic. And a couple of ideas, again, because some of you may have learned this story before. Let me share a few interesting insights on this story. Firstly, who is Kamzta and Bar Kamtza? So, of course, there's different explanations. One explanation is that it actually means Kamzta and his son, Bar Kamtza, the son of Kamzta. And which leads us to a very strange circumstance in which he invited the father because he loved the father, but he hated the son so much that he was ready to forfeit the cost of the entire event and have him thrown out. I mean, it's a very unusual situation, but again, it tells us the power of hate. He loved the father and hated the son. Generally, the system is if you love someone, you're going to at least tolerate their children. And here he loved the father to the degree that he invited him to the event, and he hated the son, according to this explanation, to the degree that he forcibly removed him from the event. But there's another question which I saw, an interesting question, which is, if Bar Kamtza knew that he was at odds with the host, why did he show up to the party? You think maybe he even should have realized that it was a mistake. You know, would you go to an event of your enemy? Why is that an enjoyable experience?
But why? You know, in Simcha, in a time of joy, people, forgive for each other and want to start.
So the I forget who says this. Maybe the Maharam Shif. I don't remember exactly who says it. He says there is a special. So he says yes. Firstly, he says apparently Bar Kamtza saw this as extending a hand in peace. He said, "Oh, I thought that we were on bad terms, but apparently he's inviting me to his party, and this is great. I see this as an opening, as an opportunity to reconnect." I mean, this all fits, especially if you say that his father was actually friends with this guy, so he probably felt, you know what, there's probably a good, we have a good history. My father gets along with him, I don't get along with him, but now I should be able to. If he invited me, apparently he's extending his hand in peace. But then so the Maharam Shif goes on to say, however, he says, from here, this connects to an interesting statement that our sages tell us, that there is a special blessing that God gives to someone who invites someone they are in conflict with to their simcha. There's a special blessing where God looks at a person and says, you don't get along with that person, but you invited him to it's called the leyeno, to your wine, to the event that you are going to be wining your celebration, and you take and you extend your hand and invite someone you don't like to your simcha. God says, just like you overcame your negative feelings towards that person and invited them to your special event, God says that will cause me to overcome, so to say, any negative feelings I have towards you. Any negative feelings because a person has done something wrong, God, so to say, may have negative feelings against them. God looks and says, if you were able to overcome that and invite this person to your simcha, then certainly I can do the same in how I'm going to judge you. And I think this is it's not just a nice theoretical concept, very practical, because we all make simchas. And often we go down the list of who to invite and who we're upset about. And very often, it comes down to, well, they didn't invite me when I can't tell you how many times I've seen this, that there's upset. They didn't invite me to an event 10 years ago, so I'm not going to invite them. The invitations of simchas I see can be, sometimes we'll just say, all right, everyone's invited, that's it. But when you're sending invitations, often it becomes about who you like, and sometimes you're very particular about people you're not going to invite. And this story of the Agmafar says, next time you're doing an event, send an invitation, at least one, but maybe more, specifically to someone who your initial thought was not to. And there's something very powerful about that. And there's a special blessing for someone in that situation, someone who does that.
Does it matter if they come or not?
That doesn't matter. You've done your part. The fact that you've extended an invitation in a real way to someone who you don't get along with is a very, and because you know why? You know what it is? Because I think the story illustrates it. Your simcha is something very personal. When you make an event and you invest in it and you spend money on it, so it's a very personal thing. It's almost your way of saying, you're my friend, so I'm going to invite you tonight. It's almost like a statement. Each invitation is a statement of closeness. It's an opportunity. It's not just an opportunity to make up a mitzvah or a wedding. It's an opportunity to reveal your friendship to people. That's what these events are. So when you do so to someone who thought until that point you were not friends or you were at odds with, it's a very powerful, you should see it as a very powerful opportunity, I guess. When you're making a special occasion, it could be a big event, it could be a party, it could be something small, but when you include someone who your initial thought is not to, it is a very profound act on your part.
Now, here's my question for you, Rabbi. What if you invite someone and then say, in those circumstances, but yet they come in and act like not
That's
the
something
biggest
else.
of
You
mensch.
invite someone and they act like
Like not a mensch. Let's just.
so
I
they're
could
not
use
act
other
like a
words.
mensch, so it's a problem, but you run the same issue. And that is that, maybe you can invite that person and say, but I'd rather you not come. No, that's.
Yeah, I feel bad.
But
He
the,
pays for the whole party.
that's right. That even in such a situation, and trust me, I'm aware of the fact that an event like that event could be ruined by someone. It's very important to avoid publicly shaming a person. Even in a situation where they are causing problems, one should go to great lengths to try to resolve it without publicly shaming. And there's ways, call a person aside, ask someone else to approach them in a quiet way, but not to draw attention. And that's, I think, there's many lessons in the story about how to behave and how not to behave and how not to get carried away. But one of them is that one should avoid at all costs the idea of shaming someone in an event, shaming someone publicly. Try to resolve it without that element. But either way,
I'll leave without you.
what's that?
I'll leave without you.
Speaking of invitations or not, so happens that tomorrow morning we have a simcha again, right? And that's that Elia is God willing going to be making a bris for his son. But there's a tradition, as you may know, that we don't send an invitation for a bris. There's no invitation. So even in the announcements which are made, typically you say that we'd like to notify the public that there's going to be a bris. A bris is unique. We don't send invitations to a bris. Why? Why don't we send invitations to a bris? The reason is because a bris is such a holy event. It's a very interesting thing. The bris is so holy that if I do invite someone and they choose not to come because of some sort of trivial reason, I don't know, I want to sleep in, or I need to go to the gym or something. So it becomes a negative, it reflects negatively on them that they were invited to a bris, which means it's a powerful holy occasion with Eliyahu Navi there and all sorts of holiness. And instead they went to the gym. So that reflects negatively on them. So in order not to cause that possibility, we say we don't invite anyone to bris. This way, don't cause anyone to have to make that decision of choosing something less important over a bris. Instead, we notify. People will come, they come. People don't come, they don't come. But at least it doesn't lead to a situation where a person was invited and chose something else. So that's why we have this idea that one does not invite to a bris, one informs of a bris. What's that? That's it. Maybe we can do the bris in the gym. So we have everything.
Lots of equipment there.
Hopefully no bris equipment. Anyway. All right, so back to the Gemara. So anyway, that's just a beautiful, important lesson, practical lesson about inviting people to an event and inviting someone who you didn't want to initially. Okay. Fine. What happens now? So this guy is obviously, this Bar Kamtza is very upset, but he decided that he wasn't just going to go home and be upset. He was going to do something about it. Omar, and he said like this. In fact, and here's another important detail of the story, lesson of the story. He says, it doesn't say, I am so upset that I was thrown out of the party and I must take revenge against this host. That's not what he said. He was upset not at that person. He was upset at the sages who were sitting there, and he said, they sat there and they didn't stop this. Shema Mina, that seems to prove Kanichalu, that they were fine with such behavior. Again, a very valuable lesson. And that is that the problem over here was not the individual who did something wrong. I mean, that was bad. But that wasn't the real issue. It was the sages who didn't do anything about it. The bystanders. How many times do we hear this idea that it's the bystanders of evil which enable evil to happen? How many times do we hear it? There is always going to be evil people. There's always going to be people who choose to do evil. The bigger question is everyone else assembled. Everyone else assembled, everyone else there. What do you do about it? And it's very easy to just be quiet and say, You know, it's not my place. It's not my party. I'm not the host. I didn't do anything. This is not my event. Think about the exact, almost like, imagine the circumstance. You're at an event. The event is not your event. Someone else is making it. A major argument breaks out between the host and someone else at the event. Most people just shy away and say, look, this is their issue. I'm just a guest here. I'm just a guest here. And yet that attitude, I'm just a guest here in a situation of negative, can have extremely devastating effect.
Couldn't sometimes it be worse that you get involved, that like the other people there intervene with the conflict, and it causes more of like an eruption?
Every situation obviously has to be addressed independently, but in this situation, this wasn't being resolved. This was here you have a person who was offering up. The man was offering a solution. He's saying, I'll pay for half the meal. Someone should have come up and said, just let him stay. Let him stay. Let him pay for half the meal. He's paying for his food. He's offering you a great deal. Let him stay. Don't let this get to your head. It's again, there's so much psychology here, how, you can have a great event. You can have a great event with 100 guests. But you have that one person that you don't want there, and suddenly your night is ruined. So someone should have just said to him, just let it go. Now, the commentaries ask, why did they not do it? Mefarshim asked, if there were sages there, why didn't they do it? So there's two answers given. One of the Maharsha says, it's very possible that you can imagine that someone's throwing a big party, spending a lot of money. It could be that this person was extremely influential. And therefore the people sitting there were intimidated by this guy. Clearly he was a bull. Clearly he was a tough person. And it could be that even the sages, all the good people sitting there, were intimidated and therefore didn't do anything. Now, does that let them off the hook? No, but at least it gives us some sort of explanation as to why they didn't do anything, is because they were intimidated by the host. And you could very easily imagine this scenario. And the other explanation I saw, what's that?
How come the Gemara doesn't say his name?
The name of the host.
Yeah.
Isn't it Kamzta?
No.
He's a very influential guy.
It's not the host liked Kamzta and disliked Bar Kamtza. We don't know the name of the host.
Oh.
He was inviting Kamzta, but he got instead Bar Kamtza. We don't know his name. Why should we know his name?
Why should we know Korach's name?
I understand. It's a good point. I'm saying the question is more, why do we know the names of negative people? When the Talmud shares the name of a wicked person, we don't need to know. Over here, we need to know who Kamzta was. We need to know his name because the whole story happened because of a mistake in the names. So we need to know about Kamzta and Bar Kamtza because that's what led to the problem. But the fact that you have a person who's a Russia, I think you could say was a Russia, did something very terrible. I guess. I don't know. There's no need to know it, I guess. So a second opinion, though, explains the Gemara is that they simply didn't. That he says that this people sitting there simply weren't aware of this. That's another explanation. They didn't know. The music was very loud. You can imagine. Music's very loud. This event happens in the corner of a room, and he picks it up. But here's something interesting about it. He thought they knew. In other words, it's again. You go back to the psychology of shame. Is that when something happens to me, when I feel shame in a public setting, my assumption is that everyone saw. My assumption is that everyone saw what just happened. Very often, it's all in my head. Yeah.
Well, if he was like isolated, then how's it public embarrassment? He was isolated.
He wasn't isolated. He was sent out of the party. He was at an event.
When the host confronted him,
right?
And based on that interpretation, he was there isolated.
Yeah, but that would make sense. That's this. You know why? Because he said, I'll pay for half. Let me just pay for my pay for half my part. How was that going to make up for the fact that he got yelled at in public?
Right.
Clearly he didn't. It makes sense.
I heard that it wasn't just embarrassment. It was also a part of like a business kind of thing, because let's say he was a big business person. It was also people that do business with him in this meal. And if he goes out and he's being embarrassed, maybe they don't do business or something like that.
That's interesting.
So it was worth it for him to pay for such big money just to.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Let me see that in the portion. That could be. I think on a basic level, it was just to avoid shame. It could be in addition to that, there was also the sense that his character would be hurt by it. But anyway, according to this second explanation, they just didn't notice. But again, in his mind, when someone is ashamed, and again, I think you can relate to this, when someone is ashamed, you assume that everyone saw what just happened because it was an embarrassing experience. And That's the second explanation. Regardless, he's upset, but he's upset more so at the people there than at the person who heard him. So what does he do? Ezel, he says, Ezel, I am going to go. Echubuhu kurtza bemalka. I will go and speak negatively to the people, to the king, to the Caesar in Rome, and I will speak negatively. I will slander the Jewish people against the Roman emperor. Oza, he went, Amarle le Caesar, and he said to the Caesar, to the Caesar, Mardu b'cha Yehudai, the Jewish people have rebelled against you. Now, a little historical context over here to explain what's going on. This is, I don't know how much to get in, how much we have to get into, but there was an era towards the end of the Second Temple in which the Jews actually allowed the Romans back into Israel, into Jerusalem. They invited the Romans in to help them solve a dispute. The Romans walked in and said, of course, you want us to help you out? And then they took control, and then they sent, over the years, starting with Herod and others, they sent Roman proxies. They sent the local leaders to Rome, to Jerusalem, to monitor Jerusalem. Some of them were better, some of them were worse, some of them were completely wicked. So you have Jewish people who are at the mercy of the local Roman, like what was the word?
Proctor?
I'm not sure what the word is.
I know what you're talking.
No, something with a PR, proctor or something.
Provost.
The local guy, the local governor who the Romans sent.
Providence.
Maybe in this, a little before this, the Jewish people dealt with a particularly wicked and vicious leader, local governor named Florus. And they were able to remove Florus. They were able to convince, they sent a delegation to Rome saying this Florus hates us. And he's causing us untold pain and death and all. And they were able to convince Rome to remove Florus and send someone else in his place. At this point, no, it wasn't, but at this point, Florus was trying to convince the emperor in Rome that the Jews really weren't trying to get rid of Florus, they were trying to get rid of Rome altogether. So it was a sensitive time because you had this Florus saying, they're not trying to get rid of me, they're really trying to get rid of you, I'm just step one. It was in the context of this moment in history, in Jewish history, in which this Bar Kamtza says, I have an opportunity. I have an opportunity to slander the Jewish people. And that's what it means when he said, Mardu b'cha Yehudai. Why would you even listen? Why would you listen when somebody comes and says the Jewish people are rebelling against you? What? Do you have any reason to believe it? Yes. So there was already voices which were suggesting that. And now comes a Jew and says, the Jewish people are rebelling against you. And he says, I'll prove it. He says, Amarle, he says, Mi Yema. He says, how do I know that what you're saying is true? Amarle, he says, I'll tell you how. I'll prove it. Shadaluhu kurban. Why don't you send a sacrifice? Gentiles allowed to send a sacrifice to the Holy Temple. He says, why don't you send us a sacrifice? Chazis, and then you'll see. See if they actually bring that sacrifice or not. Azal, so fine. The emperor says that's a good idea. Azal Shadar Bidei Igla Tilsa. He sent with this Bar Kamtza, he said, no problem, I'll send it with you. He sent with this Bar Kamtza an Igla Tilsa. An Igla Tilsa, if you find in the Talmud, it means a third calf. So in the Talmud, we come across the idea of third calf numerous times. The third calf represents the strongest. Third calf means the third born calf to its mother is the strongest. Why? So the way it's explained, and I'm not an expert in cows, but is that the first two calves that the cow gives birth to, the cow is not yet at full strength. Therefore, the offspring are not as strong. The third one is when the cow is at full strength and therefore delivers a proper, healthy calf. And then from then on, it becomes weaker and weaker. So that third calf is the strongest, and therefore it's considered to be the most choicest sacrifice. Just as total parenthetically, I happen to be the third son of my parents. It's a little bit tricky, because I am the sixth child, I'm the third son, I don't know if that counts for anything until, but the commentaries do say though, again, if those who look at the more mystical understanding of the Gemara say, you know, he says, by divine providence that he sent what's called an egel, which is a calf. You could have sent a par, an ox is a sacrifice. You could have sent a seh, which is a sheep or a goat. Instead, he sent an egel. Why did he send an egel? Because we have this tradition that all tragedy that befalls the Jewish people is rooted in the golden calf. The golden calf, it says once we worship the golden calf, which was a terrible sin, which is the sin of, 40 days after receiving the Torah, the Jewish people are worshiping golden calf. So the Talmud says, even though God didn't punish them then, but that sin is connected to every tragedy, every punishment that the Jewish people have is connected to the golden calf. And so therefore, I think this is maybe the Ben Yoel, the Ben Ishchai, who says that therefore the fact that he chose to send the calf, with that, whether he knew it or not, was symbolic of the fact that what was about to happen was connected not only to what's taking place now, but to the calf, the golden calf, which was worshipped 1,500 years earlier. So he sends this golden calf. No, sorry, he sends the third calf, Igla Tilsa. And this Bar Kamtza had this all planned out. Shada Bein Muma. He was able to place a small blemish beneath Sifasayim in the lip. He cut the lip of the animal. The Amri Lasam say he didn't cause the wound, the blemish, the wound in the lip, but rather Bidukin Shaba'ayin, but in the eyelid, in the eye. And the Gemara says, Dilididon Havamuma, whichever it was, whether it was the lip or the eye, it was the type of blemish, which is, when I say a blemish, means because the Torah tells us that an animal to be brought as a sacrifice has to be complete. It cannot be a blemished animal. And this blemish was such, Dilididon Havamuma, for us, this was a disqualifying blemish for the temple. The Lididhu Lavumu, but for them, it was not a blemish. What that means is like this, is that according to Jewish law, here's an interesting thing. According to Jewish law, once there's a temple, a Jew is only allowed to bring a sacrifice in the temple. A Jew is not allowed to bring a sacrifice outside the temple. Which is itself a very fascinating idea. You think, what do you mean? I'm bringing a sacrifice. No, there's a time and a place for everything. Just because you want to do something righteous doesn't mean it's the right thing. You have to know there's a time and there's the right time and there's the right place. So for a Jew, the only place, once there was a temple to bring a sacrifice, was the holy temple. However, for a non-Jew, the Torah allows a non-Jew to bring a sacrifice, and a non-Jew is actually allowed to bring a sacrifice outside the temple. A non-Jew is allowed to build his own, Mizbeach, they're allowed to bring a sacrifice. If the non-Jew were to bring a sacrifice outside of the temple, the requirements are lesser. It's a lower level of requirement than in the temple. So according to Jewish law, if a Gentile wants to bring a sacrifice, it's okay if that sacrifice, if that animal has a blemished eyelid or a blemished.
Why would a Gentile want to bring a sacrifice?
Why not? To express connection to God. For the same reason a Jew. Maybe as an atonement, maybe as a offering of thanks. Again, a sacrifice could also mean that the owner eats the meat, but it's part of it is brought as a sacrifice, slaughtered as a sacrifice, and then the meat is consumed by the owner. Actually, I don't think that works for a sacrifice outside the temple. But either way, whatever, the same reasons that Jew would, yes.
In this case, the emperor brought the calf with the blemish to the temple.
Well, he sent it, Bar Kamtza put the blemish in and brought it to the temple. So therefore, it should not be allowed in the temple. But he did it in such a way that it was confusing, because what he did was a blemish, which outside the temple seems fine. So even if the guards were going along with him, would see it, right? He wanted to do something which does not look like a blemish at all. If it was obviously a blemish, then it would be clear whether or not bringing it. Anyways, he brings it to the Beis HaMikdash, and he wants to bring it there. Savu Rabbanan, the sages understood what was taking place. They realized what was going on over here. And they thought to do the following: even though this sacrifice was halachically forbidden, but maybe we should bring this. Savar Rabbanan Lekrova, let's bring this. Mishum Shalom Malchus. You probably heard the term Shalom Bayit, right? Peace in the home. There's a greater peace, Shalom Malchus, which means peace with the government. So he said they understood the danger that could happen if they don't bring the sacrifice. They understood it to some degree. Perhaps they didn't see exactly what would happen, but they understood that this could anger the emperor. They understood the fragile situation they were in. They said, you know what, maybe we should override right now the Torah rule to bring this just for the safety of the Jewish people. Amar Lahu, there was a certain man there named a sage. His name was Rabbi Zechariah ben Apkulas. Rabbi Zechariah ben Apkulas said to them, you can't bring it, because if you bring it, Yomru, people will say that Baal Mumin craving Lagavim Mizbeach. People will then think that you're right. They're saying, even though yes, there's reason to bring this one, but people may make the mistake of thinking that in general, blemished animals can be brought on the Mizbeach. So therefore he says, I'm not letting you bring it. This is Zechariah ben Apkulas was a Kohen. And therefore he was perhaps the leader of the Kohanim. He says, you can't, he was a zealot. And he said, I'm not letting it be brought. So he said, okay, here's the next option. We have to bring it. How about Yehare? How about Savar Lemiptali? Delole Zavalema. So they said, you know what? We can't bring this animal. Let us go and here you have this Bar Kamtza who's causing problems. Let's kill Bar Kamtza. Let's kill him. No, they understood that he was a real threat and a major threat to the Jewish people. They said, this person is trying to harm us. We have to kill him. We have to kill him in order that he does not go back and share this information. So the same Rabbi Zechariah said, so Zechariah said, Rabbi Zechariah said, Yomru, if we kill him. So again, he wasn't opposed to that suggestion. But he said the problem is what it's going to lead people to think. Yomru, Matil Mumba Kachim Yehari. People are going to start thinking that this is a punishment for placing a blemish in the animal, and therefore that somehow Jewish law requires us to kill someone who caused a blemish in an animal. So therefore we can't do that either. So he was coming from a place of righteousness.
You're not giving suggestions.
What's that?
Not giving suggestions, but proposing
He was saying, we gotta stick to the rules, we gotta stick to the law. We can't bend the law now, because if we bend the law now, slippery slope.
Despite the consequences of being.
Well, did he know what the consequences were? No, they had no idea that this could lead to destruction of Jerusalem. But, and maybe you could say that he underestimated the consequences. Maybe, but the bottom line is he was staunch in that we have to keep the rules, because if we break the rules, then who knows what's going to happen? Then people may think that you're allowed to break the rules, which is okay. It says let's just finish this statement. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says here, like interjects from the story to share a thought. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, "Anvasanuso shel Rabbi Zechariah ben Apkulas." Anvasanuso literally means the humility. The humility of this Rabbi Zechariah hechriva aspeisenu, caused the temple to be destroyed. V'sorfas hechalenu, and caused the heichal to be burnt, the temple to be burnt. Temple to be destroyed. The heichal is the how does it translate it? Sanctuary to be burnt. The glisanu me'arsenu, and got us sent out of our land. So you see, this is very harsh for a person who is just trying to be righteous. It just tells you there's a time and a place. You know, there's that a true leader, a true holy person should be able to sense when a rule needs to be overridden because of mesiras, to protect lives.
Muhammad said, "Al tiyeh tzaddik rabbi."
Right. Don't be too righteous. I wonder if that would be applied to the situation.
Yeah, it's different, but yeah.
No, but it's important. Listen, I'm not in that position to be such a leader, but sometimes a great leader knows that sometimes the greatness of a leader is when they know when to, I don't know if the word is break the law, but when you have to go away from the law in order to protect you. Someone once asked, it was one of the great recent leaders of Jewish people, was a man named Chaim Brisker, and supposedly he was very lenient when it came to breaking Shabbos for the sake of health. You know, if someone was dealing with there's a lot of questions come up. We all know that in a life and death situation, you break Shabbos. What about questionable students? I don't know if this is life and death. It's not clearly life and death. I don't know, who decides, So he was known to be, the way I heard this at least, is he was known to be lenient and when it came to these issues. Whenever an issue came up, if there was any doubt whatsoever, this could even potentially lead to risks, he would allow a person to break Shabbos. So someone was asking, why are you so lenient when it comes to these situations in Shabbos? So he answered, I'm not lenient about Shabbos, I'm stringent about human life. So this is the this guy, he was being stringent. Yes, stringent in Torah, but perhaps a little too lenient with concern of human life. Now, I saw something interesting just earlier. The wording over here is, Rabbi Yochanan said, Anvasanuso shel Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas. What does the word anvasnuso mean? What is the word in Hebrew, anvasnuso? Which word is that connected to?
Humble.
Humble. Anav is humble. But how is this the humility of Rabbi Zechariah? The humility seems to be a strange word. So Rashi says, when he says anvasanuso, Rashi translated it as, Anvasnuso says, Rashi translated as savlanuso. Savlanuso. Savlanuso means his patience. Says Rashi, shesav because his tolerance. Actually, over here it would be tolerance. Shesav because he tolerated this Bar Kamtza, below Hargo, and didn't allow him to be killed. It's more about the second situation, the first case. Basically, he should not have tolerated this guy. But that's not usually the translation of Amasnusa. Amasnusa in its most literal sense means humility. So how do you translate this as humility? So I saw. This is also Ben Ishchai. He says no. He explains how do you translate the story as his humility. So here was an explanation which kind of changes the story a little. It gives us a different twist in how to understand the story. He says Anvasanuso means like this. This situation came up in front of Rabbi Zechariah. Rabbi Zechariah himself was a Kohen, and he said like this. He said, here we have a situation in front of us where this person wants to bring a sacrifice he's not allowed to bring. He said, we're just Kohanim. We can't issue rulings over here. The ruling has to come from the Sanhedrin. He's saying, basically, I don't feel qualified to rule on this case. Therefore, I'm not going to decide whether to take this carbon or not. I'm going to hold off on taking this sacrifice because that has to come from the Sanhedrin. So they said, let's kill him. Same thing. He said, I'm just the leading Kohen over here. I'm not big enough to issue such a ruling, to have this person killed. Let's bring it to the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin will decide that. And so they sent people to the Sanhedrin. But in the meantime, this guy says, here's my opportunity. I came, I brought the animal, they didn't bring it, I'm turning around and going back to the emperor. So it wasn't as if Zechariah, according to this interpretation of the story, it's not as if Zechariah said, don't kill him. But Zechariah said, we can't bring the animal. He said, I don't feel big enough to rule on this issue. I'm not a great enough scholar to go against Torah law in this situation. And if that's the story how it happened, then these words make sense. That it was his humility which caused the problems. He should have issued a ruling. He should have seen the situation in front of him and recognized the urgency of it and not said, go to Sanhedrin, because that takes time. Anytime you try to say, well, let's bring it to court. That's another way of saying, let's push this off another month. Yeah.
It's not Lashon Hara for him to say like Rabbi Yochanan says that it was the cause of Rabbi Zechariah that the temple was destroyed in a way.
He's only saying it to teach us a lesson. He's only saying it, and in fact, that's in a way he's even saying it as a quality. His humility, which was a quality, can turn into a negative. It's not Lashon Hara because a story which is well known is not Lashon Hara. It's not Lashon Hara. You're saying it's maybe a negative form of judgment. Lashon Hara literally means gossip, which means I'm sharing something which nobody knows. In this situation, it's not Lashon Hara because it was a well-known story. As far as should he have been more favorable in his judgment, maybe, but he felt that there's a very important lesson here. He wasn't just saying it to sort of say, throw this Rabbi Zechariah under the bus. He was saying it because there's a very, very valuable lesson here, which is there's a time and place for humility, and there's a time and place, according to this last explanation, to stand and take action to solve a problem.
So like for a famous story, like even nowadays, like Bernie Madoff or something, if someone talks about that to another person, is it like
no? It's not Lashon Hara if you review stuff for so he died, right? So so it's a different rule altogether. But no, anything which is famously known, is not considered lashon hara to talk about. It's not a good thing to do. Maybe something else. Maybe why spend time on negative, or why speak negative. Why you should judge people favorably. But as far as lashon hara is very much about revealing negative information. Something which is open to all and revealed and known to the world is not called lashon hara.
There's not lashon hara for people who die.
Right, so that's what I say, he died, but I'm saying, in this situation, right. No, but the question remains, which is, why would you choose to paint him in a negative picture? So the answer to that is because there's an important lesson over here. He's only saying this to say, in situations where you're gonna face something, maybe not as drastic as what he faced, but depending on how you understand the story, either that he was too humble to take action, don't be too humble in a situation where you have the opportunity to issue a ruling which will help, then issue that ruling. According to the other explanation, that it means that he just was too tolerant. There's a time and a place for tolerance, and there's a time and a place where a person has to say, this is dangerous, we have to stop. There's chesed has to be balanced with gvura. Kindness has to be balanced with severity. And so those are the two ways of understanding what Zachayev and Afkulah is. We'll have to stop. Let's just say, you're welcome to continue the story on your own. But as soon as this story happened, as soon as Bar Kamtza came back to the emperor, thus began the direction, the step-by-step process, which eventually led to the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem and the deaths of hundreds of thousands. All right. This is even though we don't study Talmud, by the way, we don't study Torah on Tisha B'Av. First half of the day, and as well, we don't study Torah on Tisha B'Av, even Erev Tisha B'Av. This Talmud you can study. So if you're looking for what to study on the fast day, continuation of this story is appropriate. It goes on several pages describing the tragedy and very fascinating episodes within that. All right, we'll bring out. So again, there's no meat tonight, so we have my first ever non-meat shalom. And
First ever.
So,
Vegetarian.
and it's right.
Should have advertised
And
Vegetarian children.
and what else? Yeah,
Vegan
I mean,
options.
All
it.
potatoes.
And then in about 10 minutes, we'll have America.
All potatoes. That's good.
Yeah.
It's fine.